On the morning my brother Bao walked into the National University exam, he tried to buy fate with a dress. He had hoarded a year of pocket money, skipped bubble tea with his friends, and finally pushed a box into my hands like it was a sacred offering. Inside was a long jade green dye, simple and sharp, the kind of fabric that caught light like water. "Wear it, sis," he said, pressing his palms together in mock prayer. "If you look like a lucky charm, my brain will act like one." I told him luck didn't work on people who stayed up gaming until 2. But I wore it anyway, partly because he looked so proud, and partly because I loved the quiet proof that he could be thoughtful when he wanted to be. I pinned my hair up with my mother's old silver hairpin, one tiny flower, worn smooth from years of fingers, and let Bao drag me out into the early heat. At the first intersection, he caught sight of my reflection in a shop window, and grinned so wide I almost forgave his messy desk. "See?" he whispered. "Everyone's looking. That's a good omen." "Everyone's looking because you're posing like a celebrity," I replied. "Move before I retract your ride," he mimed, zipping his mouth, and finally stopped talking long enough for us to reach the exam gate. 3 boys in white uniforms were waiting, each wearing the same kind of terrified confidence. One of them laughed when he saw me. Another immediately looked at the ground like the pavement had confessed to being pretty. Bao hooked his thumb at my sleeve, proud as a street cat with a stolen sausage. "My sister," he announced to his friends, too loud for a place that was supposed to be holy with nervous silence. "If you want her contact, I charge 50,000. I gave him the kind of smile that means I'm smiling now so I can scold you later. "Good luck," I said, warm and harmless. "Answer what you know. Breathe when you don't." 2 of the boys chorused thanks. The 3rd boy, his name badge read KHOA, only nodded, ears turning red as if my voice carried heat. Bao elbowed him and stage whispered, "He doesn't talk to girls. He's not cold. He's just shy." Koa lifted his head for half a second, eyes dark and steady, then looked away again, for reasons I couldn't explain. That single glance felt like a held breath. I watched them file inside, watched my brother straighten his shoulders like he was stepping into a story he'd trained for, and then I went home to my own life. A small rented studio, a laptop full of unfinished articles, and a job that paid by the piece, and never paid enough. I was a junior reporter for a city news site that lived on breaking stories and fast clicks. Most days I wrote about traffic, fraud, and whoever was fighting on the internet that week. I liked the work anyway, because truth had weight, and I loved the moment a sentence clicked into place like a lock. That night, while Bao was celebrating with his classmates and I was washing rice for dinner, my phone buzzed with a friend request on Zalo. The name was a single word: Sis. The profile picture was a pale, serious face framed by messy hair, as if he'd forgotten to be photogenic. I already knew who it was. I called Bao immediately. He answered with music in the background, and the hollow cheer of someone who had survived a war. "Did you sell my number?" I demanded. He laughed like I'd told a joke. "Not sell," he corrected. "Invest. It's Koa," he asked politely. I told him you're busy, and he said he'll wait. That's basically a proposal for him. "You're unbelievable." "He's a good kid," Bao added, suddenly earnest. "Top of the class, doesn't party, helps teachers set up computers. He's just awkward." I stared at the tiny avatar, at Koa's eyes that looked like they were trying to be brave in a world that rewarded loudness. I hit accept. I sent the first message with a simple sticker, a cat waving. 5 minutes passed. 10. No reply. I was halfway through eating when my phone rang Zalo call. I answered without thinking. For a heartbeat, there was only breathing on the other end, soft and startled, like someone had accidentally opened a door. "Allo?" I said. Silence. Then a low, hoarse sound, half a word, half an apology before the call ended. 2 messages followed in a rush. "Sorry, I pressed call by accident. I was waiting for you to accept and fell asleep with the phone." I laughed out loud, rice almost in my nose. I should have left it there, a harmless misunderstanding, but I was tired and a little lonely, and the world had been unkind to me lately. So I typed, with the casual cruelty of a woman who liked teasing too much. "Your voice right after waking up is dangerously nice." There was a long pause. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, he wrote, "I'm glad you like it." I stared at those words longer than they deserved. A small part of me, the part that had once been fooled by flashy men with expensive watches, recognized sincerity as something rare and faintly alarming. I put my phone down and told myself to sleep. 2 days later, my ex tried to step back into my life like he owned the doorway. His name was Vin, and at 19 he had been charming in the way a storm is charming. Loud, thrilling, impossible to ignore. At 25, he was a local influencer with a polished smile and a talent for making other people look like villains. We had dated for a year, and I had walked away after discovering he'd borrowed my notes, my quotes, and even my sources for his exclusive content. I didn't mind being broke. I minded being used. Vin didn't take losing well. He believed every breakup was a misunderstanding waiting to be fixed, like a cracked screen you could smooth over with a new case. The first time he showed up outside my office building, he carried roses and a camera crew. Not a real crew, 2 friends with phones, but he framed it like a cinematic confession. "My," he called, voice loud enough to hook strangers into watching. "I miss you. Let me explain." I stepped sideways and kept walking. I didn't want a scene, and he knew that. He followed anyway, smiling at his phone like an audience was somewhere inside it. "People make mistakes," he said. "You're too smart to stay angry." I stopped and turned, because there are only so many steps a person can take while being treated like content. "Vin," I said, calm enough to sting, "you didn't make a mistake. You made a habit." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then he switched tactics, the way he always did, from charm to pity. "You're really going to do this in public? You brought the public." I walked away, heart pounding, furious at myself for still feeling anything at all. That night I told Koa, because I was annoyed and because his messages, short, careful, steady, had become a tiny anchor in my evenings. I wrote, "If you ever break up with someone, don't turn into a walking apology with flowers. It's exhausting." He replied almost immediately, "Someone is bothering you?" The speed surprised me. I typed back, "My ex. He thinks persistence is romance." Another pause, then. "Do you want me to help?" I almost smiled at the screen. "You're a high school graduate," I wanted to say. "I'm an adult who can handle herself." But there was something in his question that didn't feel childish. It felt like a promise he was ready to keep even if it cost him. I wrote, "No, just, thanks." He answered, "If you change your mind, tell me." I read that sentence twice, then put my phone face down like it was too bright. The next week I stumbled into a story by accident. A teacher at Bao's school called me after seeing my byline, whispering like she was afraid the walls could snitch. "The exam?" she said. "There's a rumor. Someone is selling answers." She didn't have proof, only a sick feeling, but that was enough to itch under my skin. In our city, a good university seat could change a family's whole trajectory. People did desperate things for that kind of door. I promised her I'd look. I spent 2 days at cafes near the school, pretending to work while I watched. I saw parents pacing with prayer beads, kids shaking their hands to loosen nerves, and staff members in identical shirts carrying stacks of sealed papers like they were gold. On the 3rd day, I noticed a man in a gray cap handing envelopes to another man behind a motorbike shop, quick as a magic trick. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread. I didn't tell Bao. I couldn't. He deserved to take his exam without my paranoia infecting his brain. But Bao told Kwa everything, because my brother treated secrets like snacks, something you shared without thinking. One evening, after I'd come home with sweat on my back and worry in my teeth, Koa messaged, "Where were you today?" The question looked harmless, but my chest tightened. I typed, "Working," he replied. "Near the exam center?" I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered, then fell. "How do you know?" "Kwa. I saw you. You were following someone. I didn't want you to be alone." My first instinct was irritation. My second was fear. My third, the one I didn't like admitting, was relief. I wrote, "Kwa, that's dangerous." He answered, "I'm good at being quiet." I almost asked what that meant, but the typing indicator vanished, and he added, "If you're investigating, I can help. I'm studying cybersecurity next year. I know how people hide trails." The sentence made me pause. Bao had said Kwa was awkward. This didn't read like awkward. This read like competence. We met 2 days later at a tea stall with plastic chairs and a fan that pushed hot air around like it was doing charity. Koa arrived early, wearing a plain white shirt and carrying a notebook that looked too new to be used. He stood when he saw me, then sat again too quickly, as if he'd rehearsed the movement and still gotten it wrong. Up close, he looked younger than I'd expected. Clean skin, sharp features, The kind of face that made you think of late nights and honesty. He didn't stare, but he didn't avoid my eyes either. "Chimai," he said softly, voice lower than it had been on the accidental call, but steadier now. "I didn't mean to scare you." "You did scare me," I admitted. "But you also might be right." I laid out what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, hands folded neatly on the table. When I described the envelope exchange, his jaw tightened. "There's a Telegram group," he said finally. "Students mention it in whispers. They call it keys. Do you have access?" He hesitated for the first time. "Not directly," he said, "but I know someone who tried to join. They required a deposit. That's extortion. That's business," he corrected, and the bitterness in his voice surprised me. I studied him, wondering how many times life had taught him that doors only opened for people with money or leverage. "Okay," I said. "Then we do it properly. We gather proof." I expected him to back away, to remember he was still a teenager. Instead, he nodded like a soldier. "Tell me what you need." For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't pushing alone against a wall. Over the next week, Koa became my shadow in the least dramatic way possible. He didn't follow me like a stalker. He coordinated. He sent me screenshots when his classmates mentioned keys. He explained how payment trails could be tracked through phone top-ups and fake wallets. He taught me how to use a burner account without looking like a beginner. He did all of it with the same careful tone he used when he asked permission to speak. It was unsettling. It was also admirable. One night I teased him, because teasing was my default way to handle tenderness. I wrote, "You're too reliable. It's suspicious." He replied, "Reliability is the only thing I can control." That sentence sat in my chest like a small stone. I didn't know what to do with it, so I did what I always did when I didn't know. I made a joke. I typed, "Then control this. Go sleep." He answered, "After you say you're home safe." I stared at the phone, then at my locked door, and felt a flicker of warmth that made me angry at the world for nearly stealing it from me. The story grew teeth faster than I expected. 2 days before the final exam session, my burner account received a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The text included my full name, my office address, and, as a final flourish, a blurry photo of Bao walking out of a convenience store. My fingers went cold. I called my editor, who swore, then told me to drop it. "We're not the police," he said. "We don't have lawyers." I wanted to scream. "If we drop it," I said, "kids lose their futures. And if you don't, you might lose yours." He snapped, then softened. I'm not brave. I'm just practical." Practicality had never saved anyone I cared about. It had only taught people to accept injustice as weather. I didn't tell Bao. I did tell Koa. He arrived at my apartment door 20 minutes later, breathless, hair damp from running, as if his body reacted to my danger before his mind finished reading the message. "Show me," he said. I handed him my phone. He read, eyes narrowing, then lifted his gaze to mine. "They're watching," he said, "which means we're close. Or we're stupid," I muttered. He shook his head once, decisive. "You're not stupid." The certainty in his voice made my throat ache. "Koa," I said quietly, "you're 18. "I'm tired of being treated like a number," he replied, and in that moment I saw something older beneath his shyness, a boy who had learned to measure his value in silence and still decided to speak. "What do we do?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, like he was controlling his own fear. "We make the proof impossible to erase," he said. "We don't keep it in one place." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "I already started." I blinked at it. "You already?" He looked embarrassed, the red returning to his ears. "I didn't want to wait for you to ask," he admitted. "I'm sorry if that's overstepping. I should have been furious." Instead, I felt something else. The strange comfort of knowing someone had decided my safety mattered. Vin reappeared the same week, as if he smelled vulnerability. He cornered me outside a grocery store. Alone this time. No cameras. "You're investigating the exam rumors," he said, voice too casual. "Be careful." The warning sounded like concern, until his hand brushed my elbow. Not quite grabbing, just reminding me he could. "How do you know what I'm doing?" I asked. He smiled. I know you. You can't resist playing hero." "Don't pretend you care," I said. His smile tightened. I care about you not ruining things, he replied. Some people in this city pay a lot to keep certain pathways open. My stomach clenched. Are you involved? He tilted his head, the influencer charm slipping into something colder. I'm adjacent, he said, which means I can protect you if you stop. That's not protection, I snapped. That's a leash. His eyes flashed. For a second I saw the Vin I had left. The man who thought love was ownership with pretty packaging. You were nicer when you needed me, he said softly. I never needed you, I answered, surprising myself with how true it felt. He stepped closer, too close, and I smelled his cologne, expensive and empty. You needed attention, he murmured. I gave you a story. Anger rose like fire. You stole my stories, I said. And you're not stealing my brother's future. Vin's gaze dropped to my hand, to the ring finger that held nothing but pride. You really think that little boy from the gate can protect you? He asked, and something in me went cold. He knew Koa. I walked away before my temper could make me do something dumb. I texted Koa. Vin knows. Koa replied instantly. Stay inside. I'm coming. I typed. No, I'm not a child. He wrote back. Neither am I. The message made me pause. When he arrived, he didn't try to control me. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked, Are you okay? Like my answer mattered more than his plan. I told him what Vin had said. Koa listened, then said quietly, Vin isn't the center of this. He thinks he is, I muttered. Koa's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then we'll show him he's not, he said. And the calmness in his tone felt like steel wrapped in velvet. On the final exam day, when students poured out of the building like survivors, Vin showed up at the gate again, this time with a bouquet and an audience. Parents, teachers, strangers hungry for drama. He called my name, loud and polished. I brought you something. He held the flowers out like a shield. I saw Bao in the crowd, confusion on his face, and felt fury snap into clarity. I walked straight up to Vin and took the bouquet. For a split second, his eyes gleamed with victory. Then I dropped the flowers into a nearby trash can. Gasps rippled. Vin's smile froze. Don't do this, he hissed under his breath. You'll embarrass yourself. I'm not embarrassed, I said, raising my voice so the circle could hear. I'm relieved. Relieved? He echoed, playing dumb. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. You warned me to stop investigating, I said, because you're connected to the people selling answers. Murmurs rose. Vin laughed, too sharp. That's a lie. Is it? I tapped my screen. Koa had spent the last week building a chain. Payment receipts, chat logs, voice notes, a video of the envelope exchange from a different angle, and, most importantly, a message thread where a user named VIN arranged promotion for the Keys group in exchange for a cut. Vin's face drained as the first screenshots flashed. You hacked me, he snapped, voice rising. No, I said, steady. You handed your lies to the internet and thought no one would read the fine print. A teacher stepped forward, eyes wide, phone lifted to record. Parents began to shout questions. Vin lunged for my phone. His hand grabbed my wrist hard, not romantic at all. Before I could react, Koa was there. He didn't punch Vin. He didn't play hero with violence. He simply pried Vin's fingers off me with precise force and put himself between us. Don't touch her, Koa said, voice low enough that only we heard. Vin sneered. And who are you? Koa met his gaze without flinching. Someone who won't let you turn her into a prop, he replied. Then, louder, so everyone could hear. The evidence is already backed up. You can't grab it away. Vin's eyes flicked around, calculating. He realized the crowd was no longer his audience. It was a jury. He stepped back, smile returning in a shaky version. You're all being manipulated, he said. This is fake. Then let the police verify it, I said, and dialed. My hands were steady because Koa's presence was steady. When the officers arrived, Vin tried to talk his way out. He always did. But a lie collapses when enough people stare at it together. Bao watched, stunned, then turned to me, mouth open. Chi, he whispered. What did you do? I squeezed his shoulder. I did my job, I said. Now go be proud of yours. The story hit the city like a bell. My editor, who had told me to drop it, suddenly called me a genius on the front page. Officials promised investigations. Parents demanded answers. Kids who had felt cheated finally had language for their anger. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired, because victory in the real world always came with a receipt. That night, my phone buzzed with unknown numbers, angry messages, warnings disguised as advice. My office received a gift in the mail, a dead fish wrapped in newspaper. I laughed, because fear sometimes looked ridiculous. And then I cried, because I wasn't sure how to be brave without shaking. Koa came to my apartment and didn't ask for permission to be there. He asked, "Can I sit with you?" I nodded. He sat on the floor like my small space was a temple, hands clasped, gaze lowered. After a long silence, he said, "When you were speaking at the gate, I was scared." "So was I admitted. He looked up, eyes bright and serious. "But I couldn't let you be alone," he said. The words were simple. The meaning wasn't. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to tie his existence to mine. I wanted to tell him he could be safe without being needed. But I didn't know how yet, so I did the only thing I could. I reached out and touched his hair lightly, like a blessing. He froze, then leaned into my hand like he'd been waiting for kindness his whole life. My throat tightened. "Koa," I said softly. "You don't have to guard me." He swallowed. "I'm not guarding you," he replied. "I'm choosing you." Something in my chest shifted, painful and sweet. Bao got his results a month later, high enough for his dream school. He ran into my apartment waving the printout, yelling like he'd won the lottery. I hugged him so hard he squeaked. After he left to celebrate, my phone buzzed with a message from Koa. "Congratulations to Bao." I typed, "He says thank you." Then, because the room felt too quiet, I added, "How are you?" The typing indicator appeared instantly. "Koa, I'm okay." "Koa, I miss you." I stared at the screen. Heart thumping. He lived 10 minutes away. We'd met in person several times since the scandal. Still, the sentence hit me like confession. I typed, "Then come over." 5 minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, he stood there holding 2 paper cups of soy milk like an offering. His hair was still damp, like he'd showered twice out of nerves. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I echoed, and suddenly I didn't know what to do with my hands. I stepped aside to let him in. He stood in my living room, looking at my cheap bookshelf and my stack of notes like he was learning the shape of my life. "Your place is small," he said. "It's mine," I replied. He nodded like that was the point. We did not become a dramatic couple overnight. Real affection was slower than the stories people posted. Koa did not suddenly turn smooth. I did not suddenly turn gentle. We were 2 people with different scars, learning each other's edges. Some evenings he barely spoke, content to sit beside me while I edited an article, his shoulder warm near mine, his presence calm. Other evenings he flooded me with messages if I didn't reply quickly, anxiety leaking through the screen. Once, after a long day, I forgot to answer his goodnight text. At 3 a.m, my phone rang. "Mai?" His voice cracked. I sat up, alarm slicing through sleep. "What happened?" "Nothing," he said, breathing hard. I couldn't find you." "I'm in bed," I said, trying to keep my tone soft. I fell asleep. Silence. Then barely audible, "Sorry." I wanted to scold him. I wanted to tell him that love wasn't surveillance, but I remembered the way he had leaned into my hand, hungry for reassurance, and I chose another approach. "Koa," I said, "we need rules." He went silent like he was waiting for punishment. "Rules don't mean I'm leaving," I added quickly. "They mean we're building something that won't break." A long exhale. "Okay," he whispered. "Tell me." So I did. I told him I would always answer when I could, but he couldn't demand a response like oxygen. I told him fear was real, but it wasn't allowed to steer the car. I told him he could ask for comfort without turning it into control. He listened. When I finished, he said, voice small but sincere, "I can learn." The sentence made me smile, because it wasn't a promise of perfection. It was a promise of effort. One rainy afternoon, I learned why effort mattered so much to him. We were walking back from a small noodle shop when a woman stepped out of a car near the curb. She was thin, dressed too neatly for the weather, eyes sharp as needles. She looked at Koa like he was an item on a list. "Koa," she called. tone flat. He stopped so suddenly I almost bumped into him. His shoulders went rigid. Met, he said, and the word sounded like a bruise. I froze. He had never mentioned his mother. The woman's gaze slid to me, assessing. And you are? She asked. I replied, forcing politeness. I hesitated, because labels felt heavy, and Koa's breath hitched. Friend, I finished, then hated myself for it. The woman's mouth curled. Of course, she said. Koa doesn't have time for distractions. He should be focusing on scholarships. Koa's hands clenched at his sides. I am, he said, voice controlled. Then why are you with her? She snapped. Because I want to be, he answered, and the quiet firmness of it made my chest ache. The woman's eyes narrowed. Want doesn't feed you, she said. Want doesn't erase your past. The air felt suddenly colder. Koa's gaze dropped for half a second. Then he lifted it again, and I saw something raw there. My past isn't yours to weaponize, he said. The woman scoffed, then leaned closer to him, lowering her voice. Don't forget who paid for your tutoring, she hissed. Koa flinched just a small twitch, like an old reflex. I stepped forward without thinking. Don't speak to him like that, I said. The woman turned to me, eyes bright with disdain. And who are you to tell me how to speak to my son? Someone who knows kindness is free, I said, and surprised myself with the steadiness. The woman's lips pressed thin. She looked back at Koa. Call me when you're done playing, she said, and walked back to her car as if she'd just scolded a dog. The car drove away, splashing water onto the curb. Koa stood motionless, raindrops clinging to his lashes. When we reached my apartment, he finally spoke. She wasn't always like this, he said, then corrected himself. No, she was. I just didn't have words for it before. He sat on my floor, back against the wall, gaze unfocused. When I was 13, he said, voice flat, I got a scholarship to a private program. She told everyone I was a genius. At home, she told me I was a debt. My throat tightened. He continued, still staring at nothing. If I got 98, she asked where the missing 2 went. If I cried, she said boys don't cry. If I smiled, she asked what I was proud of. He swallowed. When I met Bao and his friends, they joked that I was shy. The truth is, I learned that talking makes people hit you harder. The words punched the air out of me. I sat down across from him, close enough that he could feel my presence without being trapped by it. Koa, I said, careful. You don't have to earn love. His jaw trembled. I don't know how not to, he admitted. I reached out and offered my hand, palm up, not grabbing. After a long moment, he placed his fingers in mine like he was testing whether the world would burn him. Then we learned together, I said. He started therapy 2 weeks later, not because I forced him, but because he wanted tools he'd never been given. I went with him the first time and sat in the waiting area, pretending to read while my heart hammered. After the session, he walked out looking drained and oddly lighter. It's harder than coding, he muttered. I laughed, because humor was still our safest bridge. Everything important is harder than coding, I said. He glanced at me, eyes soft. You make it feel possible, he whispered. I pretended the compliment didn't make my ribs ache. Vin did not vanish. People like him rarely do. He tried to recover his image by claiming he'd been framed. He posted tearful videos. He blamed jealous women. He implied I had seduced a minor to hack him. The last claim was both disgusting and legally risky. My editor panicked. We need to protect the site, he said. Maybe we should stop mentioning Koa. I refused. He helped expose corruption, I said. He's not a stain we hide. I consulted a lawyer friend, gathered documents, and filed a defamation complaint. It wasn't glamorous work. It was paperwork and meetings and waiting, but it was the kind of slow justice that made me feel like I was building a wall around the people I loved. One evening, after a court-related meeting, I walked out of a building into a nearly empty parking lot. A man stepped from behind a pillar. He wore a cap low over his eyes. My heart jumped. My Tran, he said, voice rough. You've caused trouble. I backed toward the exit, phone in my hand. Who are you? I demanded. He smiled without warmth. Someone who lost money because of you, he said. He took a step closer. Drop the case. My pulse roared in my ears. Then a second figure emerged from the shadows. Koa, in a plain hoodie, eyes sharp. "Step away," he said. The man laughed. "What is this? A romance drama?" "No," I said, voice steady despite the fear. "It's a police report waiting to happen." I raised my phone. "Smile," I added. "You're on camera." The man's gaze flicked to the lens, then to Koa, calculating. Koa didn't move. He didn't threaten. He simply stood between me and danger like he'd been built for that position. The man spat on the ground and walked away, muttering. I exhaled shakily. Koa looked at me, worry clear. "Are you hurt?" "No," I said, swallowing. "Just angry." He nodded once, then did something unexpected. He took my hand and pressed it to his chest. "Feel this," he said quietly. His heart was racing. "I was scared," he admitted, "but I didn't run." Something warm spread through me. "I'm proud of you," I said. The words weren't flirtation. They were truth. His eyes shone, and for the first time I saw him accept praise without flinching. Time did what time always does. It made noise fade into background and made steady things feel like home. Bao started university and turned into a busy adult who called me only when his laundry threatened to become a crime scene. My career improved. I wrote bigger stories, learned to negotiate pay, and finally moved into a slightly less cramped apartment with a window that caught sunrise. Koa studied, worked part-time, and kept his promise to learn. He still struggled with fear, but he no longer let it drive him. When he felt anxious, he said so. When I needed space, I said so. We failed sometimes, apologized, tried again. That was love, I realized. Not the fireworks people filmed, but the repairs no one saw. On Koa's 20th birthday, Bao insisted on hosting a rooftop barbecue at his dorm building. "I'm the reason you met," he declared, crowning himself matchmaker. "I deserve to celebrate." The rooftop was messy with lanterns and cheap speakers. Someone brought a cake shaped like a laptop. Koa stood near the railing, watching the city lights like they were a code he could finally read. I walked up beside him. "You're quiet," I said. He glanced at me, a faint smile. "I'm happy," he corrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," he said, looking embarrassed. "It's not good." "I like you're not good," I teased, then softened when his ears turned pink. "Read it." He unfolded the paper with careful hands. He began, voice low. "When I was younger, I thought love was a test I would fail. I thought if I was perfect, someone might stay. Then you showed up wearing green like spring and told my friend to breathe. You didn't even know you were saving me." He swallowed, eyes shining. "I don't want to be your shadow. I want to be your partner. I want to choose you every day without fear. So..." He paused, hands trembling, and pulled out a simple ring, silver, not expensive, but polished. "Will you let me keep learning with you?" My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Around us, the rooftop noise blurred. I stared at the ring, then at his face, and saw a boy who had fought his own darkness to stand here. I laughed, because if I cried, I might not be able to speak. "Koa," I said, voice shaking. "You're proposing with homework." He blinked, panicked. "Is that bad?" I shook my head and took the ring from his hand. "It's perfect," I said. Then I paused, because a single ring felt like only half a story. I reached into my bag and pulled out another box, one I'd bought months ago and hidden like contraband. Koa's eyes widened. "You?" "I'm not the patient type," I admitted, "and I don't like waiting for men to decide my life." I opened the box, revealing a ring for him, plain and strong. "So, let's be ridiculous together," I said. "Yes, and also will you marry me too?" For a second he looked like he might faint. Then he laughed, a sound so bright it startled me. He slid the ring onto my finger with trembling care, then held out his hand like he was offering himself. I put the ring on him. He stared at it as if it was proof the world could change. We didn't get married immediately. We did it the way we did everything. Slowly, honestly, with paperwork and planning, and occasional arguments about venues. My mother cried when she met Koa, because she recognized his politeness as survival and wanted to wrap him in comfort. My father pretended to be stern, then secretly taught Koa how to fix a leaky faucet, which was his version of acceptance. Bao made a speech at dinner that was 90% bragging about himself and 10% genuine emotion. My sister, he said, lifting his cup, is scary in the best way. If you hurt her, I'll destroy you. Koa nodded solemnly. I'm more afraid of her than you, he replied, and the table erupted in laughter. On the day we signed the marriage papers, there was no extravagant dress, no cameras, no staged romance. I wore a simple white blouse. Koa wore a blue shirt with sleeves rolled up. The clerk stamped forms with board efficiency. Yet when Koa held my hand afterward, his thumb brushing my knuckles, his eyes looked glassy. Are you okay? I asked. He nodded once, then whispered, I didn't think I'd get to have this. My throat tightened. I squeezed his hand. You do, I said. And you'll keep having it, as long as you keep choosing it the healthy way. He smiled, small and real. I will, he promised. Years later, people would still recognize my name from the exam scandal article and ask me if it was worth it. I always said yes. Not because it made me famous, it didn't, but because it taught me a simple truth. Courage is contagious when you share it with someone who believes you deserve to be safe. In the quiet mornings when Kwa brewed coffee and Bao spammed our family group chat with memes, I would catch sight of my old silver hairpin on the dresser and remember that first exam day. The heat, the nervous faces, the shy boy whose ears turned red at my smile. The world hadn't become gentle, not entirely, but inside our small home, we had built something steady, and every time Koa's phone lit up with my name, he didn't clutch it like a lifeline anymore. He just smiled, answered, and said, with the same low morning voice that once slipped through an accidental call, Hi, Mai. I would roll my eyes, pretend I wasn't soft, and reply, Hello, husband, while the sun climbed our window like an honest promise. After we married, the city tried to squeeze the whole mess into a tidy moral, the kind you can paste under a viral clip and feel finished with. People wanted a villain and a hero, a neat lesson about honesty and ambition. Real life refused to cooperate. The exam leak investigation crawled forward, because institutions crawl when they are embarrassed. Still, it moved. A month after our article, police raided the tutoring center that had advertised guaranteed results in bright gold letters. Officers carried out boxes of printed answer keys, bundles of prepaid SIM cards, and a ledger where candidate numbers were matched to payment amounts. The manager swore he was innocent until an investigator opened his phone and showed the exact burner account that had threatened me, still logged in. 2 proctors were arrested, and so was the municipal clerk who handled the sealed packets before dawn. It didn't fix the past for the students who had already been cheated, but it made the next cohort safer, and that was something I could finally breathe around. Vin tried to drown us in paperwork anyway. He delayed hearings, switched lawyers, filed complaints, and posted half apologies that were really advertisements for his own image. His team painted me as a bitter ex, and tried to frame Koa as a boy manipulated by an older woman with an agenda. The judge listened with the bored patience of someone who had seen too many performances. The turning point came from something unromantic: timestamps, contracts, and server logs. A forensic analyst testified that the clips Vin waved around had been cut and re-uploaded after our investigation began, with captions added to imply consent where there had only been intimidation. The court ordered him to publish a clear retraction, pay damages, and stop contacting me. He lost brand deals in a week. He tried to show up at my office once, looking pale and furious, and security escorted him out like he was just another man who could not accept the word no. We learned to build a life that didn't revolve around danger. We bought a second-hand dining table and argued about whether it could fit through the stairwell. We adopted a skinny street dog with a crooked tail and named him Mook because he followed Kwa around like a blot of ink. Bao visited on weekends, stole snacks from our cabinet, and tried to teach Mook tricks that mostly resulted in dramatic barking and zero obedience. One night after dinner, he lingered while Koa washed dishes, then cleared his throat and said, "Sister, I'm sorry I gave your contact away. I thought it was funny. I didn't think about how it could become dangerous." I looked at him and realized he wasn't a kid anymore. He was a young man trying to learn consequence. I flicked his forehead the way I used to when he was small and said, "You're lucky I love you." He grinned, relieved, and then, like only Bao could, added, "Also, I was right. You two are disgustingly perfect." Koa kept doing the harder learning. Therapy didn't turn him into a different person. It turned him into a person with options. When fear rose, he learned to name it instead of obeying it. When he felt the urge to check my location again and again, he learned to pause and ask himself whether he was seeking safety or trying to control the world. Some days he failed and we fought, and I learned to fight without cruelty. Other days he surprised me by stepping back on his own, breathing through a wave, then saying, "I'm scared, but I'm here. I'm not going to make that your punishment." Those were the days I fell in love with him all over again. Not for what he could do for me, but for what he was willing to face inside himself. On the anniversary of the day Bao first walked into that exam center, my editor asked if I wanted to write a retrospective. I said no, then changed my mind. Because stories aren't only about what happened. They're about what we decide to carry forward. Kwa and I went back to the gate early on a Saturday, when the street was quiet and the trees had grown thicker. I wore the same silver hairpin, not because of superstition, but because it reminded me I could choose what objects meant. We sat on the curb where parents used to gather and watched a new group of teenagers drift past, headphones on, futures in their pockets. Before leaving, we slipped an envelope under the school's office door. It wasn't a bribe or a threat. It was a donation, quietly funded from the damages Vin paid, earmarked for a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford private tutoring or extra classes. We attached one rule: no interviews, no names, no publicity. If the world had taught me anything, it was that the best help is the kind that doesn't demand applause. As we walked away, Koa leaned close and murmured, "Hi, Mai," as if greeting me was still a choice he loved making. I nudged his shoulder, let my fingers stay laced with his, and answered, "I'm right here," while the morning traffic sang around us like ordinary happiness. There were still loose threads, because life always leaves some. Koa's mother called twice after the court ruling, her voice sweet as syrup. "I only want to see my son," she said, as if love erased history. Koa listened without shaking, then said calmly, "If you want a relationship, it will have rules. No insults, no demands, no tests. If you break them, I will hang up." He said it the way you set a password. Clear, firm, not personal, just necessary. When she tried to argue, he ended the call, then sat beside me and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. I didn't cheer. I didn't say I was proud in a way that would make him feel like a project. I just kissed his forehead and whispered, "That was brave." Later, Bao teased him for being too polite, and Koa replied, deadpan, "Polite is my weapon." Even Bao had to laugh at that. Sometimes strangers still recognized Vin on the street and asked if he regretted everything. Sometimes they recognized me and asked if I felt satisfied. I always told the truth. Satisfaction is not the point. Accountability is. On nights when my mind raced, I would open the file of that first article and reread the line where the student said, "I only wanted a fair test." It reminded me that love and justice are cousins. Both require boundaries, and both collapse without them. When Koa slept, Mook curled against his feet like a comma, and the apartment sounded like quiet breathing instead of fear. In that quiet, I understood the strangest gift that morning had given us. Not romance, not headlines, but a shared habit of choosing the honest thing again and again. On our first anniversary, we took a train to the coast with nothing planned except escape. The carriage smelled of instant noodles and cheap coffee. Bao tried to invite himself, but I threatened to send him my grocery list for the next year, so he stayed behind. At the beach, Kwa walked barefoot like he didn't quite trust the sand. He watched waves crash and recede, then said softly, "It's like a system that keeps retrying." "You really can turn anything into tech," I teased. He shrugged, then surprised me by taking my hand and pressing it to his chest. "My heart used to be a locked file," he said. "I thought love meant someone would break in and overwrite me. With you, it feels like I got the password and chose to open it." I laughed, then blinked hard because the wind suddenly felt suspiciously wet. We ate grilled squid from a street stall, shared a single paper cup of lemon tea, and watched kids chase each other with plastic buckets. At night, in a cheap guest house with thin walls, we talked instead of pretending we had everything solved. We talked about money, about work, about what we would do if fear came back loud.